Hi, thanks so much for joining in. I'm Alex Matthew and you're watching Your Money Matters. This is NDTV Profit's attempt at getting you answers to all of your personal finance questions. It's simple because for us at NDTV Profit, your money matters. Let's talk about today's topic, and that is the mutual funds that a lot of you will have heard of. Often we talk about the best performing schemes, but today I thought let's talk about the equity mutual funds in which most people have deployed money. We're talking about the equity mutual fund schemes that stand out as the largest in terms of assets under management. And while I was discussing this with my guest today, we identified that there were 8 mutual fund schemes at last count with assets under management of over 50,000 crore rupees. We're going to talk about the top 5. Just so that we have context before I introduce my guest, we've got the top fund, which is Parag Parikh Flexi Cap fund with assets under management of close to 85,000 crore rupees. HDFC Midcap Opportunities Fund follows, followed by HDFC Flexi Cap, ICICI Pru Bluechip, Nippon India Small Cap, and the last 3 honorable mentions are Kotak's Emerging Equity, Flexi Cap, and the SBI Blue Chip Fund. Like I said, we'll be talking about the top 5, and to talk about what you should pay attention to in each of these, I've got Prableen Bajpai, the founder of Finfix, joining me. Prableen, thanks so much for taking the time. Always a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alex. Great to be on your show.
So let's talk about each one of these individually. But before we do that, it just so happens that there is quite a mix of schemes in the top category, or on the top list that we have. What stands out to you? And these are all old names in the business.
Absolutely, Alex. The top 5, we have 2 flexi caps here, 1 mid cap, a large cap fund, and a small cap. So it's a very interesting mix and with really huge AUM. And I think one thing which is great about all the 5 funds which we are going to discuss is that I think they prove that the size of the fund as it grows, it does not necessarily mean that your performance will get affected, because I think all of them have sort of proven that wrong, that only a small AUM can be agile. So with their very consistent performance over the years, I think they've kept the faith of investors and in fact attracted so many new investors with a significant rise, I would say, Alex, actually happening in the last 5 years for most of them, like for the industry. So it's absolutely wonderful to, see how the investor confidence has increased in these. And I think they've kept the faith with a very good and consistent returns all over these years.
Okay, so let's delve into each one of these. The first one, of course, is Parag Parikh Flexi Cap Fund.
Yes.
And if you have been looking at this scheme for enough number of years, like you and me, Prableen, then you will have heard comments by people when it was even at 20,000 crore assets under management. And when people were saying, oh, it's gotten a little too big, it's not going to be able to deliver the same kind of returns, but they've proved everybody wrong multiple times. Let's talk about when it was launched and what the initial journey was and the fund managers.
Right. So Parag Parikh, it's a flexi cap fund. That means that it has the flexibility to move across market caps. It can invest in a large cap, stock, mid cap, small cap without any sort of a binding. It was launched in the year 2013, and Mr. Rajiv Thakkar has been managing the fund since inception. The benchmark for this fund is the Nifty 500 Total Return Index, Alex. And I think the fund philosophy, as the tagline on the website of Parag Parikh, it reads that we value investing. So definitely it's a value-oriented fund. They have time and again proven that the factors that they give importance to are just not merely buying stocks, but they're looking at businesses which have low debt ratios. They are clean and transparent managements. And that is what I think they have tried to do even at their own scheme level. High level of transparency, and it's a 10 on 10 for the fund house on that front. They've stayed away from any kind of fancy themes, businesses or sectors. So a very conventional approach, but amazingly managed with a huge investment of their own in the fund, Alex. That's an interesting thing. The managers themselves have close to 500 crores invested in the scheme. And they've been really active with the cash calls they've taken. They have exposure to international investing, something which wasn't a trend early on. And the fund house has been actually one of the pioneers in that. Now, because of the restrictions, the allocations abroad, Alex, have come down to about 12.5%. But what's interesting in terms of the fund positioning, that if we look at 2019, so just going back 5 years, the top three stocks at that time were Alphabet, HDFC Bank, and Bajaj Holdings. And HDFC Bank and Bajaj Holdings is still the two top stocks which they are having. And of course, Alphabet is still there. The percentage has gone down because of the restrictions. So overall, very well managed, very transparent fund house, and the returns have been great as well.
Yeah, industry beating returns and certainly benchmark beating returns. Of course, when they have taken those large cash calls, they've done so at the cost of those returns. But then it's been proven over the long term that they've been justified in taking those calls. One aspect that I very quickly want to address, and we should run through some of this very quickly because we have limited time, is that as the assets under management goes up, probably in the expense ratio goes down, and you've alluded to this as well in the data you've sent me.
Yes, yes. So another point, Alex, here, because you mentioned that they've taken cash calls, and that has actually helped the fund to sort of lower the downside, and that's very nicely captured by the down capture ratio of the fund, which is at 45 for a 10-year period and 53 for a 5-year period. So that's excellent, and that is what has helped the fund to definitely lower the risk as well overall. And great returns. They've beaten the benchmark on XIRR and rolling return basis. And there, of course, the expense ratio as the size, it was just about 2,400 crores back in November 2009. And look at the size today, it is almost close to 85,000 crores. And the expense ratio has gone down from 2.11 to 1.33, Alex, for the regular plans, and it has come down from 1.18 to 0.63 for the direct plans. So obviously a reduction in the expense ratios, and wonderfully managed with a lot of focus on the downside risk protection.
Which is why a lot of people own it. Let's very quickly talk about the HDFC Midcap Opportunities Fund, which was launched in 2007, Prableen. What stands out here?
It's the consistency and the same fund manager, Alex, again, for this fund. It's Mr. Chirag Sitalvad, who's been managing this fund since 2007. And there is a beautiful consistency in the way it has been managed. The top allocations have always stayed below 5% for the top stock pick. And it was, about 4.5% in 2019. Today, it is at 4.19 for the top stock holding. And the percentage allocation, for example, the top 10 stocks was roughly around 29%. 5 years back, it's still at around 30% 5 years later. Number of stocks overall has remained the same, 70, roughly around 70. And it's, of course, a bottom approach to stock picking, low turnover. So equity turnover is around 19.61. On a 3-year rolling return basis over a 10-year period, Alex, it's given 20.35% returns, which is slightly above the benchmark. In the mid-caps, because it's a mid-cap fund, it's been really hard to beat the benchmark. The fund has managed, although with a thin margin, but it's one of the few funds which has actually beaten the benchmark in the mid-cap space on a rolling return basis as well as on XIR return basis. And it's again a huge corpus. It's about 76,000 crores. And we've seen the reduction in the expense ratios here as well. So one of the consistent performers with consistency in the fund manager's approach and style as well over these years.
The same fund house, HDFC Flexi Cap, is number 3 in terms of assets under management. And it's one of the oldest funds we're talking about. 1995 January is when the inception happened. What stands out?
Oh, amazing. It's like a 3-decade old fund, Alex. It's amazing. It's almost, doubled the NAV every 4 years. So at times it's doubled it in 2 years. There have been phases where it's doubled it in 6 years. So at an average, it's a 4-year doubling of the NAV that the scheme has given. It was managed by Mr. Prashant Jain till he exited HDFC, and now it's managed by Roshi Jain since 2022. And I think she's just sort of made the fund a little more balanced. It was more value-oriented earlier, and I think with her style of management, it's slightly more balanced, looking at a bit of momentum, growth, as well as value overall. The fund is large cap tilted. So if you look at data from 5 years back, it had about 88, 89% in large caps. Today, it's sitting at around 75% in large caps. And it has a decent cash component at present. Again, a bottom-up approach to stock picking. And it's done well for its investors, managing to beat the benchmark, not with a very, very huge margin, Alex, but it has. Over a 10-year period on a 3-year rolling return basis, the returns have been roughly around 16.37 as compared to the benchmark returns of 15.13. And SIP returns have been again over and above the benchmark by 3%. So great performance. And the scheme has managed to lower its down capture ratio in the last 5 years. So there was a bit more volatility in the fund's performance earlier if you look at the standard deviation and the upside and the downside captures, and that has actually reduced, so which is good for the fund. And of course, again, a huge AUM of about 66,000 crores, which the fund has.
Okay. The only large cap fund in the list, ICICI Prudential Large Cap, ICICI Prudential Blue Chip Fund, it's been around for a while. 2008, May, it launched in a tough period. What stands out here?
I think the timing was good actually, because that probably helped the fund to take some good stock picks at that time. It was initially managed by Mr. Manish Gudmani, who is with Bandhan now. And he managed it very nicely for many years before Mr. Narain took over in 2017. And now it's managed by Mr. Anish Tabalke. Since 2018. So we do have the fund manager consistency since last 7-8 years now. And it's a benchmark hugging approach, Alex. So broadly, they follow the Nifty 100, which is the benchmark index, and they follow the allocations based on the benchmark. Overall, it's the fund house, ICICI, it follows the blend approach. So a bit of growth and value, it's a mix of the two. The fund has managed to take decent calls when required, primarily staying in the large caps. So it's a very small allocation of, let's say, about 4 to 5% in mid caps and 1 to 2% in small caps. That is how it moves. Broadly, 90% above is always in large caps. And I think this has been a segment where it has been very hard for active funds to beat the benchmark. But ICICI Prudential Blue Chip again did a decent job. It's on a 5-year and 10-year XIRR. If you look at the SIP returns, it did well. It has ranked second amongst the active funds, and it has beaten its benchmark. And on a rolling return basis, 3-year rolling returns, it's been able to beat the benchmark with a thin margin of about 1%. So it's given an rolling returns of 15.11% over a 10-year period, and good the downside protection as well. So I think for somebody looking to invest in the large cap space, again, a decent fund to go with.
Okay. The last one is the Nippon India Small Cap Fund. And what can you say about this scheme, right? They have had to restrict inflows now because of the kind of interest that people had. What do you have to say about this one?
Nippon small cap. I mean, for a small cap fund, it is not at all small. It's a huge AUM. It's like a 60,000 plus crore AUM, Alex. And this was only about 8,000 crores in 2019. So look at the way it's grown in these 5 years, just the way, the Parag Parikh, it's been an exponential growth for these schemes actually. And this fund was launched back in 2010 when Mr. Sunil Singhania was managing it. And of course, he has his own PMS now. And it's been managed by Mr. Samir Raj since 2017. So fairly large innings that he's had managing this fund, especially during the corrections that we saw in the small cap space in 17, 18. So they've been tough years in the small caps. And the benchmark is Nifty, of course, the small cap 250 index. Again, they are very, because there was a shift from Reliance to Nippon as Nippon came in. And I think the focus has been so much on risk management since then. Of course, the fund size has gone up, and so has the number of stocks, Alex. But they have a mandate to restrict the highest allocation to around 4%. Currently, the highest allocation to one stock is under 2%, which is interesting. And of course, it's a superbly diversified portfolio of almost 250 stocks, and yet they've managed to deliver the returns. And I think that is something that we really need to give credit for. But they are maintaining the liquidity with holding large caps. So they are not taking too many cash calls. The liquidity is maintained with the large cap exposure in the scheme. And I think what is interesting is that they have been able to remain agile despite a large AUM. So they have been agile in terms of the sectoral calls and the stock movement that they want to take. And again, very sound returns, 3-year rolling returns over a 10-year period at 26.35, which is the highest over this time period. And the 10-year XIRR, the SIP returns are at again 26.33. So wonderful performance by the fund. And I think it'll be interesting to see that now with such a huge AUM, how does the fund perform going forward? And because you mentioned the restriction, Alex, it's about 50,000 rupees per fund, like on a daily basis through an STP or an SIP. But on a monthly basis, it's a restriction of 11.5 lakhs. That's what the maximum can be invested per fund for a person.
Which is something to bear in mind. And of course, flexibility and nimbleness comes into play, particularly in the small cap space, because ultimately they're investing in stocks that have relatively lower free float, which is always a bit of a concern, right? But Prableen, thanks so much for joining in, for going to the key details of all of these schemes. These are household names, as we said at the start, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers have benefited from this conversation.
Thanks so much, Alex. Thank you.
All right, now, on Thursdays, what I like to also do is have a segment called Travel Thursday. This is something I began doing in the COVID-19 pandemic, where we were all stuck at home and we were dreaming about places that we would like to visit. And I said, why not talk about things that we could put on our bucket list? But of course, you have to plan for this. So allow me to introduce my guest today, who is a travel expert and someone who visits a lot of places. She's Purva Joshi, who's joining us from Dehradun today. Purva, thanks so much for taking the time, and pleasure having you on my program. We're going to talk about a place in Ladakh today. Can you tell us more about what you've selected?
Hi, Alex. Thank you for having me in this show. And we are going to talk about Zanskar, which is a very, very beautiful part of Ladakh. And it is one of my top destinations in India. And even if I have to pick one destination around the world, it would be Zanskar, because it's that beautiful.
And what we're going to do is, while we're speaking to you, Purva, we're going to put some of your content, things that you have actually gone out and shot, and I must say, it's really beautiful, the visuals that you've managed to capture. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you can get there? What's the best time to travel?
So getting there is not as easy as of now, because the roads are still coming up. So you can either take your own vehicle if you're an expert 4x4 driver, or you can get a taxi. The best time would be around June to November, but you can also go around the winters if you're somebody who loves adventures and extreme sports. But yeah, June to November is a good time to go.
Okay. And if you're traveling either solo or with somebody else or in a group, what are the do's and don'ts that you need to be aware of?
Most part of Zanskar is in the high altitude. So there's like this mountain called the Gombo Rangjon, which is above 14,000 feet. So I think whatever you need to take into account that you're going into high altitude. So you need to prepare your body in that way. You need to drink lots of water. There's a saying called, don't be Gama in the land of Lama. So you don't have to overexert yourself. And if you follow all these precautions, you can have a very good time and not fall sick.
So from that perspective, I've heard that if you go to a high altitude area, which I've not experienced myself, hopefully someday, and maybe it's going to be Zanskar, but if you have to spend a little bit of time to acclimatize yourself. So are you talking about spending a decent amount of days? Should you be willing to go for at least a couple of weeks?
Yeah, I think for Zanskar, you need at least 7 to 10 days for like properly explore it. And before that, if you're going on road, like you can start from Manali and then slowly start to go up. So that is also a good way to acclimatize. If you're starting from Leh, then you'll need at least 2 days to acclimatize in Leh itself.
Okay, so a few days to acclimatize in Leh. What is the kind of money that you need to set aside? And this, of course, is going to be completely dependent on the experience that you have. So, what are the options available?
So I would say for a trip that's a week or 10 days, you'd need at least 50,000. Because they're not local transport is not that readily available here. That's why you'll have to either depend on your own vehicle or you'll have to get a taxi, which are not that cheap. So I would say 50,000 if you're looking for a week.
Person? And this is per person, Purva?
Yes, definitely per person. But if you're going in a bigger group, the expenses can be shared and it could come down to a cheaper cost.
Okay. And what about staying facilities? So, do you book places in advance? Are there hotels? Are there hostels that you look at?
So there are different places, and no, you cannot book everything in advance. For example, if you go from Manali towards the mountain that I talked about, Gombo Rangjon, you can camp there, and the costing would be around 1,500 to 2,000 for the night. And then if you go further up to Phuktul Gompa, let's say, then there's no connectivity there, so there's possibly you can't reach out to them beforehand. So you can just reach this village called Purne, and you can stay there for 2,000 to 2,500 a night. And so basically, if you stay in Leh, Manali, or Padum, you can easily find an accommodation and you can pre-book as well. But then, if you're exploring all these other places, then it's definitely not that easy. Once you reach, you can get something reasonable to stay.
Okay. What about the other experiences? So obviously, this is something that would call out to the hearts of all of those adventurers out there. But what are the things that you should absolutely do?
I feel like one of the highlights of Zanskar is the Phuktal Gompa. It's a 2,500 years old monastery, and you can only reach there by foot. And once you're walking on that trail, it is just so beautiful. There's this Zanskar river flowing beneath you, and you're walking on this deserted mountain. And then once you reach, you can see the entire Gompa, which is on a cave. And I think it's one of the most peaceful places I have ever been to, and I totally recommend other people to go there.
That sounds absolutely incredible. In fact, I'm practically dreaming that I'm there right now, the way that you're describing it. What about food, Purva?
I would say for somebody who loves a lot of spicy food, not a lot of options, but if you're somebody who loves meat, then you can try a mutton thuppa, which is very readily available there. And there's something called a butter tea, which is a milk tea with salt in it. You find these in other areas as well of Uttarakhand and Himachal, but it's definitely something to try. It's an acquired taste for sure, but I personally like it. It helps me keep warm in the cold temperatures.
Oh yeah, that's certainly something to bear in mind, right? Because is it cold round the year? Do you have to prepare accordingly because you have to get layers, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's cold around the year, but as as September, October, if you're going around those months, it's even colder. And if you're camping, like I said, in Gombo Rangjon, it is definitely not easy, and you have to keep that in mind before you plan the trip and keep enough layers so that you can be warm at night, especially.
Okay. The other thing is, if you're a pure vegetarian, and as so many of us are, what do you have to bear in mind? Do you have enough options available?
I would say there are options, but if you are a person who cannot compromise with taste, you should carry something of your own as well. Like, especially if you're taking your own car, a small burner and a utensil where you can cook a little bit of things on your own or some masalas with you so that you can, add a little flavor to the food that has been served to you, then that will be great.
Instant noodles always to the rescue in that situation as well. But what about the people? Because this is something that is so important, right? You go to a place and you have to interact with the people. What are they like? And what are the languages that you would speak there?
The people are incredibly sweet and very welcoming. It is actually very inspiring to see that they're living this life, which is so hard, coming from the city where we have all the luxury. And now these people are just walking kilometers just to reach their home, or they have to walk kilometers just to, buy something that they need. That it's very, very inspiring to see that. And they usually speak Ladakhi over there, and they have different dialects in different places, but it's similar mostly.
Okay. And so do you need somebody to translate for you?
No, almost all of them also know Hindi and
Fantastic.
English, because a lot of tourists also come there. So it's not that difficult to communicate with the people there.
Fantastic. I think you've painted a lovely picture for us, Purva. Thanks so much for joining us on this program.
Thank you, Alex, for having me. It was so nice.
All right, that brings us to the end of this edition of Your Money Matters. We've spoken about some interesting things today. Let us know what you think in the comment section, and do stay tuned. This is NDTV Profit.